Puerto Rico, una tierra de belleza, de ritmo y de sabor. Last time around, I told you that this island has been home to countless Jews for more than 500 years. But Puerto Rico carries another story too. A story of resistance, of hidden identities, of people who resisted the Spanish Empire and the Inquisition. And now we're stirring those memories back into the pot, letting their aroma rise and bringing a fresh serving of arroz to the table. Joined not only by Puerto Ricans, but also with the crypto-Jewish brothers and sisters we've met along the way, and by those who have chosen to walk with us, learn with us, and reclaim with us. From the island to the diaspora, from the descendants of the Anusim to the friends and family who've joined this movement, their journeys, their stories, their truths all come together here. So make room, porque la mesa has grown. This is the next chapter in the living, unfolding story of Spanish Jewry. You're watching Arroz con Devorah.
Hi everyone, B'siyata Dishmaya. Welcome to this special edition of Arroz con Devorah. And if you are new to this channel, please consider subscribing so that you can stay up to date with all the latest episodes and the incredible guests we have lined up. What happens when Jews say these two words that have the power to distort centuries of Jewish history? My guests today are here to talk about just that. My first guest is a filmmaker, heritage educator, and an immense travel leader dedicated to reviving forgotten Jewish history. A New Jersey native who later settled in Mallorca and uncovered the island's hidden Jewish past, a discovery that inspired his documentary, Xueta Island, a hidden history, with over 2 decades of experience guiding Jewish and non-Jewish heritage travel across Spain, Portugal, Morocco, Uzbekistan, Iceland, Mexico, and Argentina. My gosh, my passport is already tired. I'd like to welcome first time to the show my good friend Dani Rotstein, and my second guest, many of you may recognize. She's a recurring guest on the Arroz con Devorah franchise, and she's the author of Hands-On Jewish Holidays. Please join me in welcoming back to the show Arroz con Devorah alumni extraordinaire, Ronit Treatman. Hi, guys.
Morning. Hi, shalom. Shavua tov.
Shavua tov. I'm so excited to have the two of you on here. Ronit, we always have a good time. And Dani, your first time here, you're gonna see it's like lively, it's sazon, it's everything. But I'm so excited because I can't think of like two other people I'd love to have this topic on camera, right? And have it be a safe space, because this is such an explosive topic. And a word, I want to say, like, who knows, arguably one of the most controversial words within the Anusim movement. It's a word that has a long history, and it's synonymous with the crypto-Jewish community. So I wanted to talk about, the history of this, just the context of what, sometimes when it was used not the right way, sometimes when it was used what people thought was the right way, and certainly not in an offensive way. Because to this day, I get not as much as before, but I still get people who reach out to me really struggling to find the tools on how to address this within their community, right? So real-time tools. So I want to kind of give, this platform on YouTube has an audience that is Jewish, non-Jewish, the most frum to the people who are just discovering. So I want to kind of start the conversation with such a safe space, the two of you. And, Dani, you did some great work out in Mallorca. And I want to start off with you and
Sure.
to have Ronit also join in. Take the floor, Dani.
Yeah, well, I just want to go out and on camera, on record, say thank you so much to Ronit, who put us in touch. And there's another word that not maybe everyone knows, that's beshert, which means like meant to be, like destiny. And wow, talk about our connection. I mean, Ronit had emailed us introducing the two of us and
back in the
Devorah.
winter, right?
Yes. Like maybe like January, February, something like that. Very recently, a couple months ago, and like a day later, someone had sent me your YouTube, and it was like I had to like put the the connections together, and I was like, wait a second, is
I
this the
think it
same?
was
This
Juby
is like,
Shapiro. Yes, I think it was Juby
yes.
Shapiro. Yes.
Yes, it was all happening around the same time. And like Ronita put me in touch, and then Juby had just done the podcast with you. And
Yes.
I was like going for a
Yes.
jog,
Yes.
listening to your podcast. And then I wrote to Ronit later. I'm like, wait, is this the same person you just introduced me to? Like, what are the chances? Like, so it was all very the shared meant to be. And yeah, I feel like connected to a sister from another mister.
I was just gonna say, like, and I feel the same about Ronit. I feel like she's my older sister. I feel like we're a sibling connection somehow. So I'm really like, I'm like a kid in a candy store who hasn't seen their siblings that they like, right? Because you don't always like your
Right.
siblings, but
This
it's
is true.
such a
This is
good
true.
time. So I can't. I'm really like excited.
No, it was really, really meant to be. And I actually have to, it's an interesting connection that I'm making with this, that Hashem has plans for us and we don't know what they are. And we just kind of like follow as best as we can. And that's completely what happened with my story. I mean, I did the DNA test. I'm 99.9% Ashkenazi. I have no business being curious or interested. I mean, we can all be curious about many different things in the world, but it's not like I have for fact Sephardic heritage. I don't believe my family came from Spain or Portugal. Although I don't know if I shared this with the two of you at any point. My grandmother, who's still with us, 94 years old, amazing. She came from Germany, and she says there was legend in her family that there were four brothers that came from Spain and left around the 1700s. Rose, Lehman, Grunewald, and there's a fourth name they don't know. But that doesn't ring true for me because they wouldn't be Jewish, at least outwardly Jewish, in the 1700s in Spain, leaving and going to Germany, which is where my family came from. So and then I did the DNA test, and there's nothing that says Spain or Portugal in it. So it is very interesting of how I came to Mallorca because I'm a producer on TV commercials. That's like my main gig for many, many years. And I got a job in this island, off the coast of Spain, and went there thinking I was going to be the only Jewish person on the island because there's a little thing that's called the Inquisition that, lasted for centuries, 400, 500 years, that basically did not allow for a large Jewish population. Not many people realize this, but in France, the current Jewish population is around 400,000. And in Spain, right next door, about 40,000. So look at the difference between those two countries right next to one another. And again, we know the reason why Inquisition being there from 1488 till 1834. I mean, people don't realize how long the Inquisition was an establishment for. And so just a quick little story about this word that we keep referencing, but we haven't said it out loud yet, which is Marrano. And this is a word that I grew up hearing in New Jersey in Hebrew school. And I understood it to mean secret Jew, right? Someone who is doing Jewish things in secret, or someone who's Christian with Jewish roots from a long time ago. I literally understood that's what that word meant. No one mentioned that it has another use in Spanish, which you'll understand why. So this quick little anecdote I have to share with you. I moved to Mallorca and 3 weeks later met my wife, Carla, who's from Barcelona. She's Catalan. She doesn't necessarily say she's Spanish. She says she's Catalan, which is a whole other story there. And she moved to Mallorca. Like, we started dating. We found a dog just on the street, like a street dog. We adopted him. We gave him his name. His name is Taco, the small little terrier. And he eats everything on the street because he's a street dog. And we're walking around one day. It's amazing that this happened. And he starts eating something disgusting and gross off the ground. It's like nasty, And Carla goes, "Hey, what are you doing, you little Marrano?" And I jumped up, and I promise you, I looked at my wife shocked, and I said, "Babe, why are you calling our dog a secret Jew? Like, what does that have anything to do?" She looked at me like I was the weird one. She goes, "Secret Jew? What are you talking about?" I go, "What does Marrano mean?" She goes, "Means you piggy, you pork, you dirty animal, you swine, you're eating something you shouldn't be eating, you're disgusting, you're gross." And that's when light bulbs went off in my head. I go, "Oh, this is an insult. This is like a terrible derogatory term that I, as an Ashkenazi Jew growing up in New Jersey, I never knew that. No, I didn't speak Spanish back then." And so that's when light bulbs started to go off, like, oh, wow, we've been calling this group of people Marranos, but it's an insult. It's a terrible word. And that was the way I actually understood that Marrano has several different meanings, and we should be careful of what we should use to say them. Isn't that a weird
And I,
way
and I
that I
hate to
learned the
say,
meaning?
I hate to tell you, it is still currently used. I just found this lecture being publicized in Brooklyn College. It's by Dr. Sharon Flatto, and the course it's called well, it's in Judaic Studies, and one of the things they're talking about, and it's written here, the Marrano diaspora. They actually, this is currently offered now.
Yeah, and I think this highlights the reason why this conversation really is important. I think that, the three of us have had a long-standing relationship with the Anusim community, and this is by far the number one or top three, issues that they are constantly struggling with. And I know for myself for many years, always trying to calm people down on this side, trying to educate on that side. And I think I shared with you, Ronit, and I certainly shared it on Arroz con Devorah, that, what prompted me to write the book When Jews Say Marrano, ironically, it was like a twofold punch. One of them came from a Sephardic rabbi of all, right, who has this ancestry, but their family kind of left in the expulsion and made on a public sharing, and he said, these Marrano Jews. And I just felt like a gut punch, because I felt like it's one thing, like you said, from the Ashkenazi side, sometimes there's a little bit more leniency because they don't know the Spanish. This Rabbi felt like knew. And he was such a respected Rav. And, sometimes when some of these Rebbeim come on and they say stuff, it's like Moshe Rabbeinu coming down with the tablets, and the whole Kahal accepts it. And I was like, oh my gosh, like what a missed opportunity here. Didn't even back up the statement with, it's known as like none of it. It was just a straight statement, period, hard stop. And then, like shortly after that, and I really feel this was a set up from Hashem, I was on LinkedIn and I saw this post that Mamish literally was like, Brooklyn Marrano, and he was trying to draw parallels to the modern day visibility of certain Jews to the Anusim community. And I think what really upset me wasn't so much the post, but I saw the entire Jewish community that was on. I mean, there were a lot of comments supporting and celebrating this comment, and a lot of them were Rebbeim. And I said, enough's enough. And then I wrote this book. And, it definitely was not coming from a place of an indictment, but it definitely was not mincing words either, right? This was, a conversation that I felt like, all of us who have a public platform, I think we always have to be mindful and take that platform with a lot of responsibility, because we are, especially with such a sensitive topic and an emerging history that's been kind of, buried for centuries. And, to have someone that you respect publicly use that word in that context, it's very disorienting. Like, I think as the person, and, I've had to struggle for years in finding my voice and when to push back and how to push back. Like, is it something that someone is using? I mean, I've had the conversation with people, for instance, and I've been very vocal about this in the Muncie community, that when you tell them what it means, like you, they immediately like,
I feel terrible.
And they feel a pledge to educate their family and their friends, but also never to use the word outside of saying this is what it meant.
Well,
but
I've dealt with it from both sides. I've dealt with it from both sides, whether it's conversing with the Reconectar community, whether it's in Spanish or Portuguese or Catalan, where I'll show something historic.
Sure.
Because unfortunately, Marranism is the academic term. And
Right.
if you get historic letters, even written by Jews, it will say the Marrano. And so they say, why is this word there? And I'll tell them, I can't change a historic document. Look at this. It's from 1926. What do you want me to do? I can't showing you a picture of it. And what can I do except say, I don't approve of this word. We in Reconectar, we are very much trying to educate people to say Anusim, Bnei Anusim, or crypto Jews or converso, something that is not an insult. And on the other side, like I've given talks to mixed community, whether it's Sephardic and Jewish, And I start by saying, does anybody know what this word means? And sometimes not everyone does. Very few people do. In Israel, even less. Like they'll say Marrano, and I'll tell them, no, do you know what you're saying? And they don't. They really don't know. So to be fair to them, they don't know. They just read that somewhere. They don't even know how to say it. So then I explain it to them and I give them an alternative. I also educate. I give an alternative.
Exactly.
And the word Anusim wasn't a new word coined for the people who forced to convert in the Inquisition. It was already used in Germany when there were forced baptisms for those Jews. So that's a Hebrew word. It means it actually comes from a reference of even by rape, even by force or rape. If you're forced to, if it is imposed upon you, spiritually raped, then
Wow. I mean,
you're
that's where the
not
word comes from in Hebrew, Ronit, right? La nui is to force, to
la
violate.
anos,
La nos,
ones,
anos,
afilu
ones.
beones, right?
And
Honest
that
is
literally
rape,
translates to,
honest is rape or force, and it's afilu. It's actually like it was in Aramaic, da afilu beones. So even if it was by rape, you didn't willingly, you were raped spiritually too, or raped spiritually, and so it wasn't, you're not an apostate, right? There's a difference between an apostate, a meshumad, which is somebody who rebelled against halacha, who chose to go against being Jewish. There's a difference between being meshumad and anus.
Yeah,
which
and I
there
want
are
to.
those in Inquisition times as well, right? There are people who converted willingly and
So
converted who
this is what
didn't.
I
But
want. So this is what I bring out, and I think I brought it out in the book as well. That I always say, because there's always this who did what when, which is something we really none of us can really know, right? The motives.
no,
Hashem
we
knows,
don't
right?
know.
So I always say, especially like I remember, really having this conversation with the Rebbeim privately, some of them, and just saying, listen, I'll concede. I don't believe, but I'll concede that, come July 31st, 1492, let's say everyone that stood, Has v'shalom was a Rasha, they did it for the wrong reason, whatever. Come August 1st, everyone born, every child, that identity and that religion is imposed upon them. There isn't even a conversion, it's a baptism. It's an automatic. So what do you do now with every generation that comes after that has had this identity imposed upon them? There is no choice. So this is what I'm saying, that I think that the narrative of, which by the way, the handful of Reshaim within our, Jewish family, unfortunately, that made decisions for the wrong reasons, or sometimes made decisions that seemed that they were for the wrong decisions, but really were, secretly for some other motive, right? Again, we can't, know the reasons behind that, but it seems to have swallowed the narrative of everyone who has come before and has erased the sacrifice that a lot of these people went through to hide this identity and transmit it from generation from what I can see in some of these communities, quite successfully. I mean, there's some communities that they were not lighting and not knowing why. They knew exactly who there were, and there's emerging evidence to kind of support that. So I really think that, when it comes to the history of the Inquisition, like I'm sure the two of you can, I feel like science and medicine, they have this like, we reserve the right to say based on new information. And I think that the study
Right.
of crypto-Jewish nature should also be adopting this, that based on new information, right, we're all trying to uncover over 500 years of suppressed information. And that's going to take time. And some of the things that we thought we knew, I know myself, even within my own family, evolves with new
Well, also,
information.
this is a story, Devorah, that the very people themselves have been trying to keep it under lock and key. Like, how do you tell a story or do documentation when the whole centuries have been trying to stay hidden and trying to not be outed, for lack of a better term?
Right.
And
sometimes from
that,
people in your own community or family. So it was always a risk even within that.
the other thing I wanted to just quickly mention is what shocked me in Brazil. When I was in Recife, in the northeast part of Brazil, I met communities who were sharing with me how their families Jewish traditions, how they married within some of the same families. Oh, we don't marry those people. They're not one of us. That's the type of stories I was listening to. And at some point, they somehow came up and said, we are Marranos. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, do you not know what that means? Like me as an Ashkenazi Jew was like, I opened my mouth, but then I stopped it. I closed it very quickly because who am I to tell someone that they shouldn't label themselves? But it was fascinating. I asked, I said, but that's a bad term, right? They're like, no, but we are proud of our crypto-Jewish. We're proud of this word. We are Marranos. We are. And so for them, these particular group of people that I was speaking to, they wanted to use this word. And so that was also very complicated for me because I had just come from a place where, no, you can't use that word anymore. And then the very people who identify that want to take it back. So that was a very fascinating piece to the puzzle that I was learning about.
They're not the only ones because, and we can discuss it later too, but in the Sephardic Jewish community of London in the 20s, they were saying, we are the descendants of the Portuguese Marranos. We were the Marrano Jews. And they said it about themselves too. And it is how they referred to a committee that they founded to help the crypto Jews of northern Portugal who were interested in returning to Judaism. They called it the Committee for the Marranos. The synagogue
Wow.
a member of in Philadelphia, which is a Spanish and Portuguese synagogue. Its congregation, Mikveh Israel. I shared a letter they received. They received several letters, fundraising to help build a yeshiva, a school in Porto. And, it was interesting because here it is, it's, 1929, the Great Depression begins, and still people who were losing everything gave to help, which shows that they cared, that they wanted them, to return, that they wanted to help, that they felt that this is our people.
Yeah, and if you're watching on the screen, you'll see the letter that Ronit is referring to. And I got to tell you that even within the letter, you can really see the hope and the pride that they had that this was coming together. So I think that goes to the point too, like what you were saying, is that some people were proud, right? And academically, historically, this, for whatever reason, has also, joined in the space of not such an offensive way of referring to people as well. But there's I'm thinking of a letter as well that Shulamit Halevi has from I believe it was Harav Aron Soloveitchik prior to his passing, in which he strongly supports and gives some halakha clarity as to the treatment of people claiming Bnei Anusim background. And one of the words he uses in there is machanos. Now, certainly he is not doing it to offend. So I think this is, these are two examples of communities or people who are not trying to be offensive. But we see this word in history repeated over and over again, for better or for
Beyond
worse.
that, here it is. I found the names of the founding families of the Sephardic community in London, and I wouldn't be surprised if they even found relatives in Porto. Okay, so here are their last names from 1669. Luna, Gomez, Acevedo, Rodriguez, Diaz. I wouldn't be surprised if they found some cousin or something. And so it goes beyond the use of whatever you call yourself. It's, you are my cousin, you're my family.
And this is interesting, Dani, because you went to Mallorca, and now there's another word, right? Like Xueta, that has the same connotation, Xueta. But also it's actually referring to certain families that were there.
That's right.
And I want you to talk a little bit about this. And by the way, if you're on the YouTube, Bezrat Hashem are going to have links to his documentaries and to everything.
Thank you.
I really think it's well worth you watching if you want to get more understanding. But I want you to tell us a little bit about your experience there.
So this was it. So here I am, in New Jersey, growing up in Hebrew school, and I knew this term Marrano, and I knew a little bit about the Inquisition. I studied in Madrid when I was in college, actually, so 2000, 2001. And then fast forward to 2014, I get a job as a producer in Mallorca. I'd never been there before. Again, thinking I was going to be the only Jewish guy on the island. And all of a sudden, I find out through a friend at work that there's a synagogue, one that you can actually 10, not one that's in ruins and, or turned into a church or something like that, like happens very often in Spain. And I went to services on a Friday night. It was, it was very odd. There was no security. You kind of like, it was not very easy to find. I couldn't find it online. I had to make a couple phone calls. And I finally got in, and I remember this incredible moment where there was no rabbi, no chazan, just like a lay leader, a volunteer from Argentina, Sephardic actually, who was leading. And there was a light mechitza. There were some plants that divided the room between men and women. And I remember him looking over the men's section and like counting just before the Baruch Hu, where you need a minyan, where you need a quorum of 10 men in the Orthodox sect of Judaism to do certain prayers like the Kaddish, etc. And I remember him looking, counting, and then he said out loud, "Oh, we don't have a minyan today. We have to skip." And he said all this in Spanish, of course. And I remember counting 14 men in the men's section. And I remember asking the guy next to me, "What's going on here? We have a minyan. There's 14 of us. All we need is 10. And he looked at me if I was the odd one, and he said, "Well, that's obvious. Some of these men must not be Jewish. They must be Xueta." And this was one of the first time that I heard this term Xueta before. And I said, "They were what?" I thought I misunderstood him. He said, "They're Xueta." I go, "What does that mean?" He goes, "I'll explain to you after the services." So, after a time, I began to understand from speaking with local people there and the people that are expats, Jewish living on Mallorca, that Xueta means Catholic descendants of the Jewish conversos from Mallorca. And there are a list of 15 last names. And these Catholic families, because they have not been practicing Judaism, maybe their ancestors were secret Jews and were doing this secretly, but today they're quite Catholic because they're always trying to prove how Catholic they are to the rest of the society, the island society. And these families have been marrying within the same families for over 400 years, up until around the 1920s, 1930s, when you start to finally see people with Xueta last names marrying out. And these are names like Aguiló, Bonin, Cortez, Fuster, Miro, Pico, Taronji, Vaiz, Segura, Pina, Martí. There's 15 of them. You can look them up online, and we can actually have a slide that shows all of them. They're in our film, etc. And these families, no one wanted to marry them. So they have been marrying within the same families. And the word Xueta has a number of, we never know where these words necessarily come from, which I find fascinating. So there's some French Jewish historians that want to put a French twist on it. And they say chien means dog, Xueta, chien. Okay, you're calling someone a dog. That's not nice. I've also read Xuet is like a female owl, like a dark, ominous bird that you don't trust. I like to give these examples just to show that there's many different ideas and you can kind of choose which one you believe. I personally don't go with the French because we don't speak French in Mallorca. We speak Mallorquin, which is a dialect of Catalan, which is a completely separate language, by the way. Catalan, Spanish, two separate languages. Mallorquin and Catalan is like American English and British English. They're the same language, but different dialects, different words.
Some of those names you mentioned have returned to Judaism. There's a famous writer. His name is Miquel Segura Aguiló. He returned. You have a chef whose last name is Pina. He even transmits sort of kosher Sephardic recipes. He's been featured on Radio Sfarad several times. So
yeah, both are in our film.
Are actually interested in returning.
That's right. There's probably today about 20,000 people with Xueta last names living in Mallorca, and we believe about 15 or 20, maybe up to 20 now, have returned halachically to Judaism. And so at the synagogue, some had returned halachically. Mikel was there, Tony Pina, who goes by Pinchas, he was there. So they counted for the minyan, but then there were others that were still in their process of return, and perhaps others that were not even with Xueta last names that just wanted to convert to Judaism. So they had not finished their process. So that was why, the leader of the shul kind of knew who was in the process, who had completed, who had not. So that was the reason behind there. But what's fascinating about where this word comes from, right? Like the way you say shuya in Catalan means bacon or pork. And so similar to the Marrano maybe comes from Marran, which means swine, pig, pork in Old Spanish. Shuya in Mallorquin, the local language, literally means like the remnants, the last bits of the pork, of the bacon. And there's like legend, which I personally believe to be true. I've heard it enough in many different oral stories that I've interviewed, where people would cook bacon and pork outside their homes, these Xueta families, as a public act, as like, look, I'm cooking bacon and pork. I'm not keeping kosher anymore. Look at me,
Puerto Rico has this. in the montañas.
Similar in many places, I'm sure, hanging pork sausages out of their homes. Like we've seen this in crypto Jewish stories. Now, some of them maybe could have been doing this outwardly to not have any bacon or pork in the home. Like that I've read that as well. But I do think mainly they were trying to assimilate. They wanted to be accepted by society and be not be discriminated anymore. So this was like a public way of saying, leave us alone. And so this is where Xueta could come from. And the other fascinating mixture is the way you say the word Jew in Catalan is Jueu. In Spanish, it's judío, but in Catalan, it's Jueu, Jueu. Now, a not nice way to call someone.
Too, and very close in
yes,
Portuguese.
Judeo, right? In Portuguese, yeah. And in Catalan, it's Jueu. And a not nice way to call someone Jewish is Xueto, you little Jew, making it small, diminutive. Xueto, So listen to it. Xueto and Chueto sounds very similar. So, Xueta could be a mix of like you little Jew who likes to eat bacon and pork, which
the other interesting thing with that is that Marrano was not only used to describe crypto Jews, it was also used to describe crypto Muslims. They're called Moriscos, also
Morisco.
Muslims, and Morisco is also the same, as you say, the diminutive, it means little more. That's what Morisco actually means. Yeah. Now, interestingly, Marranism as an academic discipline, it only applies to crypto Jews. It does not apply to crypto Muslims. And the other interesting thing about the Moriscos was that there was actually a fatwa that allowed them to practice in secret, to retain their secret Muslim beliefs. That in their society, it was not a stain. The point was survive and stay Muslim, do what you have to do. So they sort of took the sting out of it a little bit.
Yeah,
interesting.
And I think too, like what you were saying, Ronit, survive, right? I think, I think in Judaism, right, we're a religion that teaches life, right? And there is just so much debate, right, about what they should have done, what they shouldn't have done, and it's really heartbreaking because I feel like sometimes, Am Yisrael as a whole gets caught up in the semantics, right? Instead of like, okay, here we have the people in front of us, the descendants in front of us. Like, what do we do now, right? And and I sometimes like it's mind-boggling and mind-blowing the lack of information that even the yeshivot have on this. I think when I was trying to get the documentary Zachor up and running and interviewing a lot of the Rebbeim, that's where it became painfully clear that come, August 1st, it was as if the history was gone. And the narrative that got replaced is that everyone was gone with it, which is why I say I feel like we're in the Ani Yosef moment of the generation. Just the lack of information, the cutoff, and I think sometimes it's a little sad because I think that some people like to get, like I said, caught up in the semantics of what someone should have done. They should have went to the fire. And sometimes I got to point out to the Rebbeim, if they were going to the fire, that means they were already Christian, right? So that decision was already done. So let's get that. Because it's like you're condemning them and praising the other ones at the same time. And it just doesn't make sense. And again, it's so disorienting. And I think this is why it's important, if you're coming directly, if you're a descendant of this, that you really have to educate yourself, not only to the history, but to the real time, what's happening, especially if your goal is to reintegrate back into Am Yisrael. But with that, you have to take it with you have to have a lot of rachamim for everyone around, right? Not just for your story, but for the people who are absorbing you that they really don't know, like Ronit has pointed out, like you pointed out, so it's going to take time, but I think it's going to have to be a community effort. But part of that is really giving you the tools of, even though you're feeling this rise within you to kind of fight back and say, you don't have to do that, right? Like I always joke, especially on my Facebook, that I'm a chancla tasona, right? But sometimes you don't need to have a chancla in your hand all the time to smack someone. And I think sometimes, and you can tell, right? When someone is genuinely unaware of the meaning, that's an opportunity to educate. Sometimes some people, they also have the intention of that's what they mean, little Jew, right? And they're really looking to, and sometimes people get so outraged and incensed. And I say, sometimes, listen, stay true to who you are. If this person has showed you who they are and their intention, better for you, right? You wouldn't necessarily want this person in your circle anyway. So I think sometimes, as someone who comes from this, it really takes some practice discerning, right? Like the old song, know when to hold them and know when to fold them, right? Not everything is a war.
One thing that can be very helpful when dealing with the Jewish community and the rabbis is that there is rabbinic responsa about dealing with the Anusim and the Bnei Anusim, and it is a favorable responsa. I mean, it's how, it's what we do in Reconectar, where we don't try to convert anyone, by the way, but we're here that if anyone has questions, and we get a lot of those about the last name, their secret traditions, they're curious about Jewish customs, Israel, they try to understand what they were doing in their family. We try to help in any way we can. If they're interested in converting or returning, then we send them to a rabbi who can help them with that. That's not we don't do that. But I think that reading the responsa, which I've shared with our readers, is helpful. You kind of and also it's really interesting if you look even in the history, when the people who escaped to North Africa, they would have a ceremony of return. I think they had it in the Ottoman Empire too. They would do that.
Yeah,
Interesting.
I'm really curious, Ronit, like, because you've been in this space for a while. Do you think there is there's more awareness now and like a refraining of the way people are, using the word, or do you just see like we still have a lot of work to go?
I don't think there's such an, it depends where you are. I mean, I just did this talk. Well, I did a talk to raise money for Hadassah hospitals, and I asked my audience, and I had, maybe 60 women there. I said, does anyone know? And it was actually at Mikveh Israel, but not all of them were Sephardic people who came to the talk. And only maybe 3 or 4 out of the 60 knew what it meant. I think if I ask it in Israel, I will get less. I think that all they heard is Marrano. They don't know, and they don't know what it means. So no, I don't think there's an awareness, because it's also used as an academic term. They're not even trying to be rude. They think it's proper. If they've read it in an academic paper, they think it's the proper term. They don't think that they're not trying to do anything wrong, and don't think they're doing anything wrong. It's not from a bad intention.
Exactly. And I think no one understands like the roots of the word, because they hear the word, they see the word academically, as you said earlier in the interview. A document from 1920s has it written in a very official looking document. So why would you think that it means anything else? But it's like, when you understand the roots, and that works both ways, by the way. This is an interesting anecdote I want to share with you both. When we were thinking of what to title our film, in the end, we went with Xueta Island, but it's spelled Xueta. People don't even know how to pronounce it.
No.
And again, the intention was obviously to share with the Jewish community of Mallorca, to share it with the non-Jewish community of Mallorca, but also to share it with people all around the world who've never been to Mallorca or never heard about Mallorca. And so I'm from the States. We were excited to share it with people from the United States. So I called up my friend, who at the time was working at the ADL. She was in charge of marketing at the Anti-Defamation League. And I said to my friend, I have a crazy idea. I think I know what your answer is going to be. But in order for audiences to understand how charged this word really is, like if you're from Mallorca and you hear this word, it's like, oof, you can get really insulted by it. Mm-hmm. I said, I want to call the film Kike Island. Okay. So Kike Island. All right. So people from the States can really, stop and see what that word means. And my friend said, Dani, I totally get what you're trying to do, but you cannot do that. Your film will not see the light of day. It'll get blocked on social media, like the whole thing. Ironically, this is 2019.
Will flag it.
Well, nowadays the algorithm will explode with all the anti-Semitism going on in the world. Now it actually would be
without even knowing what the movie's about.
Right. That exactly. And then, so we didn't call it that. We wanted to call it by its original term, which is Xueta Island. We thought, like Jumanji, like a word no one's ever heard of before. Maybe they'll be interested in it. And it's done. It has been successful in terms of like people being interested to know what it is. But a quick side note is, when I looked at the roots, do either of you know where this word, the K word, comes from? This terrible, awful word. Like, you think it means like, oh, has to have a terrible history related to it. from what I've done in research, it comes from the Polish word kikel, which means circle. And there's a lot of beliefs that when Polish Jewish immigrants or Eastern Europe immigrants who speak Yiddish were coming into Ellis Island, they didn't want to sign their name next to an X because it looks like a cross. So they signed next to circles or some other symbol. And so they just started, all the Jews that came in were being called kickles, were being called circles. And then Kiko went down to Kike, or also Key. A lot of last names, like Polish last names, end with a Key or a Ski or something like that. So when you think about it, this terrible word, this slur, has very innocent derivations. It didn't come from any awful meaning. It just was a mean way, terrible way to call Jews, and it still exists today. And so I think that that's fascinating when you think about where the words come from, which is, we didn't talk about it, but I've also read and Ronit, I'm sure you can speak to this, and Devorah, maybe you as well, that Marrano might be from this Arabic word muharram, which means forbidden or prohibited.
Yeah, I actually have that in my book.
I was about to say, in the Middle East, if you're talking to Jews or Muslims and you say haram, forbidden, then they can suddenly realize, when I say marrano, in a way comes from that, and it's because none of us eat pork, right? Jews and Muslims do not eat pork. We both think it's unclean. We don't touch it. And so that is a helpful way to explain to Israelis why they should not call people marrano. That makes it much more clear, since many of them do not speak Spanish.
And it's right. Very interesting. When the book came out, when Jews say Marrano, I was very surprised at how many people from other communities said, well, what about the word this or that? And it was like all these words. And I was thinking, wow, this is a much bigger issue, right? The name calling, I guess, within Am Yisrael, right? Which is a housekeeping within Am Yisrael. We have to really start to change the language that we use and really treat each other with a little bit more respect. I'm curious on both of you, because you guys both have, been in academic spaces. And, do you feel that when it comes to this word Marrano, that there is a double standard? And here's my thinking about this. Like, one, let's take the N-word, the infamous N-word, right? Which we've all learned. And right, this was a word that was used in academics. One rabbi had the nerve to tell me that it was like, if Tom Sawyer used it as if to say, then certainly it's fair game. And we, as a society, taking great steps to understand that this is not okay, right? So we're in an age, right, where everyone is so, you can't say this, you can't be offensive, you can't X, Y, and Z, we don't want to trigger anyone. And yet this word, it's almost like it gets a pass. What do you guys think about that?
I think not enough people know enough about Jewish history to know anything about it, to be honest. This is a very, to me, it seems like a very esoteric area. Most people, if I try to explain to them what I do, I have to get into the whole thing. They don't know. I start by saying, if it's in
how much time do you have, right?
Saying, do you know anything about Iberia? And then even this talk I gave in Hadass, I said, do you know that there was a caliphate in Iberia, which no one knew for 800 years?
Oh, well, I was just going to say a long-standing one.
Yeah, no, I tell them, and they didn't know. They don't study that. And then they have heard a little bit about Inquisition, but they don't, very little bit. The Inquisition, it makes them fantasize about the tortures. They don't really know very much more, and they know that they're Marranos. They don't know anything else. And that's who might know it, and the rest of the people don't know it. And, so I don't, in the Anglo sphere, I don't find it to be widespread. In Israel, they study some history, so everybody says Marrano, and that's kind of it. It's not, I don't think you can really compare it to a more widespread use of other kinds of insults.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the word itself, depending on different circles, means different things to different people. Like, I'm someone I had a Jewish education, so I learned the word from a Jewish perspective. Then my wife knows the word as we use it today. That's the other thing that people don't realize, that people still called my dog a Marrano, or she talks to, I mean, this is not nice to say on camera, but every now and then my son will pick his nose. It's just like, don't be such a Marrano. Yeah. She's not using it in any Jewish context. She's using it in the current use of today in Spanish vernacular, language. And so I think it's depending on your your community, who your like where your language skills are coming from. I think that's where it comes from. Look, I like to mention it because I think it's important that we talk about history and we don't judge it. We say this is what happened and we need to educate about it. And so I vary in my tours, on my lectures, and my films. I say, look, this is a word that used to describe a group of people, and the word is Marrano. We can say it out loud, but we should know that it actually has derogatory results. It was used as an insult. We should be using the word converso. B'nai Anusim is probably the most, I think, academically accurate, which is Hebrew for descendants of those who were forced. It's interesting that there's no English. I don't know what you would say in English. You know, the correct
Jews. I would just say
crypto Jew. You
or
know,
forced convert. I would translate it that way. And I mean, I'm on the board of the Society for Crypto-Judaic Studies. We're an academic organization, and that's the proper term. I would
right.
also add that in Spain, they still have many sayings,
Oh yeah.
Jews and pork, that are not nice. And actually, I pulled together a few with their current meaning that I want to share with you for a second. So,
Okay.
let's see here. I'm going to say them in Spanish and English. Just have a few of the most sort of prominent one. One is, está bien parecer colgado como tocino en casa de Marrano, which is, it is all right to look out of place, like bacon in the home of a Marrano, right? Hanging up in the ceiling. And then they have one which is, nunca vuestro abuelo Gómez pagó diezmo de lechones. Never did your grandfather Gómez pay a tithe with pigs. And that sort of goes to the purity of blood, where they're showing, you have to pay a tithe to the church. And if you didn't pay it with bringing pigs to the church, then it means that your family historically didn't raise pigs. So, and the whole point is to show that you don't come from a good family. And another one was, hizo más cristianos el tocino y el jamón que la Santa Inquisición. Bacon and ham made more Christians than the Holy Inquisition. In other words, many converts, Jews and Muslims, by the way, consumed pork or cooked some bacon to demonstrate their loyalty to the Catholic Church, so that nobody would accuse them to the Inquisition, that they're Jews or Muslims. And so what happened with this? There are some dishes that go back to ancient Jewish traditions that are still part of the Spanish cuisine, right? They just have pork in them, and they're like cocido gallego, fabadas. These are all kind of slow cooked stews. They have a lot of pig products in them.
Well, I'd love to share, if I can jump in for my ensaimada story. Are you familiar with the ensaimada in Mallorca? This is incredible. And Devorah, I don't actually know if I shared this with you, but Ronit, I'm pretty sure. When I first moved to Mallorca, I saw the ensaimada and I go, I've been eating this all my life, because I have Jewish family from Puerto Rico. But we don't call that circular bread ensaimada. We call it Mallorca.
Oh, well, Mallorca.
No. In Puerto Rico.
Yeah,
in Puerto Rico, they have the bread.
That's right.
Yes.
That's called Mallorcas. And I've been eating Mallorcas all my life, growing up visiting my family in Puerto Rico.
And since you're saying it, I think, I don't know if the shape, if people would, because I know a lot of times in bakeries, they have a pastry. It's like what they call elephant ears. It's like a circle.
Right.
And
yes,
let me tell you, it's a staple. It's a staple. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
You know it. And I looked it up. Apparently, once upon a time, it was called pan de Mallorca, bread from Mallorca. And then over time, it just lost the pan de part, and they call it Mallorcas. And by the way, we can talk about this later, but there is a lot of documentation about Xueta, crypto-Jewish families leaving Mallorca and going to settle in Puerto Rico, which is like the next thing that I'm documenting.
I have cousins who have that kind of lineage as well, So it's funny because it's funny. It's almost like when we came to America, there was two camps: the ones that went to New York and the ones that went to Chicago. We have also in Puerto Rico the one that came from Mallorca and the one that came from the Canarias. So we have like these two, and it's very funny because,
and even in Mallorca,
the group from this one, and the group from this one.
Yeah, the interesting thing about the ensaimadas is, for Carnival, they fry them in olive oil, and that was a way sort of like for the descendants of Jews to kind of avoid eating lard, to just have something that was kosher.
That was fried. Yeah. So I saw it there and I got so excited. I'm like, oh my God, I now understand. They call it Mallorcas because they're from Mallorca. So I said, okay, I'm going to bring it back to my family. When was the next time I was visiting my family in New Jersey? My family from Puerto Rico was coming up to visit in New Jersey. Pesach. Terrible time to come back with a huge they make them big from Mallorca. They're these big, almost pie shapes.
Yeah.
But I came home a couple days before. I walk into the house. My mother goes, no, no, no. I already took the comments out, so you eat it in the garage. So one by one, my family came out, tried the Mallorca from Mallorca, which is actually called ensaimada. That's what they call it in Mallorca.
Right.
And I was like, all right, I did such a great job. I get back to Mallorca. I'm at work one day, and we start talking about all the different ways you can eat pork in Mallorca. There's sobrasada, there's salchicha, there's chorizo, there's butifarrón, there's morcilla. Literally, the list goes on, 20 different ways. And my friend goes, oh, don't forget to add ensaimada. And I go, excuse me?
Yeah,
what are you talking about? There's no ham in the ensaimada, because I'm thinking, ham, and he goes, of course there is. I go, I don't eat pork, and I've been eating ensaimada for 6 months. I don't know what you're talking about, And he goes, Dani, I don't think you know what the word saim means in the local language. I go, oh no, I don't want to know. Don't tell me. Saim in Mallorquin means manteca.
And
Spanish,
it comes from the Arabic. It comes from the Arabic for fat.
Yeah.
Saim is from an Arab word, yes. It comes from Arabic.
Arabic meaning fat, which today saim is lard.
Fat. It's the fat from the
pork fat.
It's the rendered fat. Exactly what it is.
Right. So here I was, a great, awful, terrible Jewish Jersey boy giving his whole family right before Passover. Lard cake is what that translates to. Luckily, the only one who cared
during Yom Kippur. You get to make
right, exactly. Which that's another interesting to talk about Kol Nidre. But my mom is the one who is the kosher. We call her the kosher cop of the family. My father's Israeli, super chiloni, secular growing up. Your mother's not looking. Let's have lobster. This is like how I grew up. And so I couldn't bear to tell my mom. You'd love this, guys. So she comes to visit, of course. She goes, we're walking through the city center. She goes, oh, look, it's the Ensa Mama thing. Let's have it. I go, no, they don't make it very good here. Let's go somewhere else. I kept, shopping her around, like going somewhere else.
The one in olive oil. That's the one.
So the epilogue is that, I finally did tell her, I obviously didn't do it on purpose. It was all okay. But later I found out by speaking to some friends of mine who are Xueta, who go to the synagogue, who've returned to Judaism now. They go, Dani, the ensaimada didn't always used to look like a spiral. I don't have my PowerPoint, but we can put some pictures in the interview afterwards, Devorah. It actually used to look like this. And so I have a picture that shows you that it used to be braided. It used to be a circular challah with braids, and it used to be made with vegetable oil. And so when the Xuetas, or I should say their descendants, with olive oil, they would, they Christianized their own challah. They Christianized their own food when they were forcibly converted in 1435. They said, okay, we're not Jewish anymore. Here's our Jewish challah. We are putting lard into it. So maybe, this is, again, it's this hidden history that's so hard to tell. The ensaimada might have come from Jews and Muslims, like putting pork fat literally into the special bread. And someone else told me that recently, up into the 60 years, it was braided, and it only started doing spiral when they started exporting ensaimadas to the whole world, and it became super popular. It's faster to make when it's just one spiral, and it's cheaper. You don't have to use so much dough to do the braiding. And so maybe this is where the idea comes from.
It looks like a snail.
And that's why I said challah, because that's sometimes we do it when I'm being lazy and I'm under the gun, I'm just like, But
right. In Puerto Rico, they make it with Crisco, my aunt told me. I was like, we've been eating Mallorcas all this time. Have we been eating lard? My aunt said, no. These ones are made with Crisco, which is with vegetable fat, I guess. I don't know. But it's fascinating. It was really, really interesting.
Because even in Puerto Rico, they have a lot of, like, for instance, you were talking about making the pork. See, we're all, I remember my grandmother's cousins, and he's about like in his mid to late 80s now. And he said that, when you go into the montaña, there's a lot of these fire pits outside. And whenever there was like a holiday, Easter or whatever, Christmas, that the priests used to go on el por caballo, in the montaña, to see who was making the pig, right? And they would roast. So they said this is how the minhag of roasting the pig outside was picking up. And then they would throw it over the mountain, right? So the mountain probably had like more pig carcass than I know what to do it. But I remember thinking, and I had this hidush, and I said, there's one thing that is not kosher that will become kosher when they say when Mashiach comes, right? And that is the pig. And a part of me says, this word, Marrano, right? Marrano, that, it almost makes me feel like, is this a way that, the roasting of the pig, not eating it to remember what they did to us, and that when the Mashiach comes, like those who are Jewish on the inside but not kosher outside will all be rectified. So I felt like this was such a parallel, and it was so like it just screamed out to me when he was saying this, that it's almost like Hashem was like even building in within our psyche and our ancestral memory. Remember what was done to you, and it's almost like remember Amalek, right? Like remember what we've done
in
to you.
Judaism, by the way, once you're born a Jew, you die a Jew. I don't care what you
Right.
said you were. It doesn't matter. You could be baptized. It makes no difference. And I know from some of my community members from Brazil, they have all these traditions with a new baby where they take the baby to the church to be baptized, and they take the baby home and they put salt on his tongue so he has a bad memory. And they wash off the oil, and they do all these things to unbaptize. They do a different ceremony.
First time I'm hearing about this.
Yes, so it's part of me says that and I realize that not everyone can show unbroken matrilineal lineage, but I'm always sympathetic, because if that flame remained inside, and I always tell people who are hostile, I tell them, look, it is so much easier not to be like this. Think about it. They tell me that their blood calls to them. Think of how much easier it is to just be a normal Catholic, not to have this conflict. Right? Just think of how easy your life would be.
My grandmother used to say
restlessness, like you belong somewhere else.
Yes. My grandmother used to say this: La sangre se llama, y si alguien es judío, siempre va a ser judío. And this is what she said to me.
A lot of people say
we're
this
talking
to me.
way before, like 2002. She was saying this when I was questioning her, and she was saying, if you're a Jew, you're always going to be a Jew. Those tendencies will come out.
That
flame will always come out because the blood calls. It's not something that you can ignore.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you see this, and this is what I mean about sometimes we get caught up in the semantics of what happened before instead of dealing with what's in front of us, right? And trying to get educated, which I think, it's such a multi-tiered solution that has to be thought up, right? There's education, there's the archaeology of just the lineages, the customs. There's a lot of work that's got to be done, and I really feel like because of the amount of people, I have to say, like the Anusim are probably arguably the fastest growing demographic in Am Yisrael, and so little is still known about them, right? And I got to tell you, it's a fascinating history. And for those communities that have successfully absorbed them and brought them in, I'm sure they will attest that it's been so enriching to the Kahal to have them there. And all of the insights that they bring and all the minhagim that they bring, which a lot of them are holding to medieval standards and hearing. But I think, there's a lot of work that has to be done, and I don't think it's necessarily a prejudice directed at the Anusim community. I think that sometimes, why do we have no third temple, right? Why was the Beit HaMikdash destroyed? For baseless hatred. And I think that this is a great example of that, in real time. And sometimes it's so, we don't even know that we're doing it. I think it's so embedded to behave this way.
I don't think it's hatred. I don't think anyone hates. I think they just don't know. They don't.
Ignorance.
That's what I mean.
To the subject, they have no hatred. They just don't know the people exist.
Yeah.
I have two questions. I have two questions for both of you. One that's come up in listening to our discussion right now. One is this loss of what was once known as crypto Judaism. I don't know, I'm sure maybe you're familiar or not with Frederick Brenner's The Last Marrano, I'm pretty sure is the name of the film, a documentary.
I'll have to look it up.
It's amazing. It's about the crypto Jews of Belmonte in Portugal.
Oh, I understand. I know the story.
El Ultimo Derrière in French, I believe. Yeah, so you know the story of Belmonte. It's very similar to the Xuetas. It's except even more. I think they were familiar with the word Adonai. I mean, they actually did kosher. They did Pesach, something different around the time of year Pesach, where they had this special ceremony where they all dressed in white and they made matzah in a basement in secret. I mean, it's fascinating, this film. And he filmed this in the 1980s, 1990s. And what came out in that film...
their own prayers that they had composed.
Exactly.
Rezaderas.
Right.
Let's-
And so
let's-
the Ashkenazi Jews came in and said, no, this is Judaism. You have to do it this way. But of course, they're practicing something called crypto Judaism, which is syncretism. It's actually a mix between Catholicism and very little remnants of what Judaism was. And one of the interviewees said very clearly, this is what we know. This is what my mother taught me and my grandmother and my great grandmother. I don't necessarily want to do this
right.
other new Judaism from the 1900s, from when it was filmed, and so there's something sad about that, in my opinion, that we're losing this very incredible tradition of what once was crypto Judaism, that I'm sure can be found in New Mexico. Ronit, I know you've worked a lot there, and in other parts of Latin America. And so I'm curious to hear what you think of both about this idea of trying to preserve something versus trying to
No,
bring them into
I
this
don't think it's
20th.
sad. No, I don't think it's sad because I feel that these people have been spending so much time trying to reclaim something and not being
Or
able
hold
to
on to
talk
something.
about it. I mean, one of the things that I've started to do after many years of running these sort of managing these communities on social media, where I'm the only person, many of them live in a place where there's no one Jewish. They have no one to talk to, nobody to ask, and it's a taboo to talk about in their family. It's a culture of silence, a fear of discussing it. And so I've had a lot of private correspondence with people where they ask me everything. And then finally I opened it up as a conversation within our close group. I said, look, this is a safe space. Some of you, we've been conversing for 10 years. You know me by now, and you know that you can talk to me. And the reason they can is because I'm kind of an unusual combination, right? I'm Israeli, but I grew up in Venezuela. I went to Jesuit school for 1 year where I was really taught by nuns. So it's sort of this kind of fusion. And also, when I did the DNA of my family, I found the surprise. I wasn't expecting that the Ashkenazi side had been in Spain before. I mean, Catalan Jews from Girona that I wasn't expecting to find. And it
Wow.
showed that in like around 1492, the family split. And the side I come from was the one that went to Italy and the Netherlands, and then from there to Poland. But the other side, it shows him staying there, and probably sometime in the 1600s, they go to Recife, which means I have forced converts in my family that I still have to meet my hot Brazilian cousins. It's never happened yet, but
They're there.
Yeah, it's funny. In between, so there was a very short window when I was filming, and off camera, I'll show you guys some of the pictures and video and stuff. What eventually ended up being in the last Anusa, there was a short window of maybe a few weeks between that trip and then going to Spain. And in between that, I actually met with some really big Rabbanim. I went into Manhattan and showing them some of this stuff. And there was an immediate, what do we do?
yeah,
Right? Because this was a community that, one, is very isolated.
yeah,
Yeah.
But two, ironically, what I had not expected to hear is that there was concern that if they did pull them out the way they had with previous, and one of the people they were mentioning was from Portugal,
Portugal,
and
Belmonte.
the Belmonte, and then also there was another, and I think I'm not sure if it was the Yemenite community that they were also doing this to, that there was a concern that some of these minhagim were so medieval standard that they were afraid that to bring them out would lose the continuity and dilute it. And so to this day, there is, it's almost like a monitoring, right? Like, what is the right thing? They're very aware that these communities exist. And I think they really appreciate anything that's coming out documentation wise, and not just in document, but just pictures, whatever, so that it gives them a real understanding. I think that that's led to a lot of change in the mainland when people with this background come forward, that more Rebbeim are starting to have a good handle on what the story is. So I'm very happy about that. But there is, and even for myself, like I'm always, some of the things that they are hiding are bigger than just Jews, right? There's other things in there that these communities have been holding tight for a long time. And sometimes, you see this over and over again in history. We go in and it's gone. It's like, it gets killed out for whatever reason. And so there is always this pull back and forth even for myself, how much do I say, trying to protect the names and the locations of these people and communities, especially because there is no, bring them here to what? To Marrano? To your, you can turn on the light on, like, what am I bringing them to,
One
right? When they have.
example I can give you is if you look at the Ethiopian Jewish community, which is even more ancient, and they have pre-temple traditions. They were
Yeah.
teaching the rabbis, okay? They were teaching the rabbis about things that had been forgotten, mistranslated, misunderstood, and they've incorporated some of their observances and turned them into national holidays in Israel. And when I was a little girl, we lived in Ethiopia. My father was an Israeli diplomat there, and I remember that then they were just a myth. My father flew to Gondar
Correct.
to see for himself, and he came back amazed. He said, "It's true. They have all these traditions in the middle of nowhere. How else could they have them?" But when they started to come to Israel, they were, I mean, I wouldn't have been well versed enough to know this, but there are rabbis who were studying what they were doing and said, "Oh wow, this is pre-temple, it predates, and we're learning about ourselves as an ancient people from them." So I don't
Yeah, but I think,
necessarily think
Ronit,
that it's
I want to
lost.
I'll push back and say I think that with the Ethiopian case, it's very, very specific because I don't think that is necessarily happening with people like the Lemba tribe in South Africa and Zimbabwe, or Igbo in Nigeria, or even, I mean, we know of so many different Jewish communities all around the world, Kaifeng in China, B'nai Menashe in India. And I don't know if that was the timing period, right? In the 70s and the 80s when we Israel went to actually save Ethiopian Jewry and bring them to Israel. But I don't know if, from what I understand today, that the Rabbanut is not that intent on bringing lost tribes or people who identify as Jewish but who were not born into a Jewish family or raised Jewish to Israel to reintegrate back into the
Well, I know from
society. And
India,
that's.
they're there. There's a large community from India.
Mhm. I mean, this is something that I've been finding in my research just around Latin America. I'm sure you're familiar with the takana,
Yeah.
which is this idea of not letting any converts into particularly the Syrian Jewish communities in Argentina and Panama and Mexico and in New York, I guess. And I've been learning a lot about it. That once upon 100 years ago, there was this a fear of assimilation into the diaspora societies, and so they kind of made this dictatum, the rabbinic dictatum, saying we can't allow for converts. But
Well, in the Sephardic
now,
synagogues, it was different. In the Sephardic synagogues, it was the fear that the convert would come, and this is an ancient thing, that the convert would come in and try to drag everybody else down with them, right? To make them
mm,
also convert, to persuade them
mm,
to follow in their path. And therefore, in the Sephardic synagogue, they were not welcoming.
right, and,
That was the reason
actually,
they had, because they all shared the same roots, okay? They
well,
had the
this
same roots.
this this leads to my second question that I had for you both. Like, is it how important is it for you both to distinguish between someone? Let's be very specific so you can understand my example. Someone from Mexico City who is from a Catholic family and is not sure they have Jewish roots versus someone who feels that they've been Jewish in another previous life. Like, does that two different people for you have the same impact in terms of, hey, let's help this person, learn about Judaism, and if they want to go through a process of conversion or return, they can do that.
What
That
I
was my
do,
question to you.
I get questions like that all the time. The first thing I do is I say, well, why do you feel this? And, we investigate their name. I encourage them to do a DNA test, to do a genealogy test, to see why they're doing this. We kind of explore the reason. And I mean, I'm happy to help them, and they're free to read. There's a lot of material out there. They can learn all they want. Uh, I have nothing to do with
Does it is
conversion.
it any more important for you once you find out that they have Jewish roots versus if they don't have Jewish roots?
My personal mission is, if they have Jewish roots, then I'm interested in working with them. And if they're just kind of curious for whatever reason, I have no reason to deny them the knowledge. I won't exclude them from my group. But I mean, then again, it's, if they want to go the conversion route, that's between them and I don't care if they're just learning. It doesn't, why should I care? That doesn't take away anything from anybody else. I'm already doing it as a volunteer for free anyway. And as long as they have no malicious intent, they're not there to attack anyone. No, I don't care. No, I don't. I mean, I won't deny. I mean, yeah, I don't deny them that.
Yeah, and I
Okay.
think for myself too, like it was funny. I'm really glad that my Rav pushed me to do the book, and at the time it was the docuseries, which was so bootleg compared to what I do now. I just can't even believe like. But I was glad that I did it because at the time I was documenting. Um, I had all these questions, right, and no one that ever tried to contradict in my family that I was imagining these things, yet they weren't saying it openly. And that took a lot of time to unearth. What I will say is that, and I've said this many times, that I was always having like a parallel and for sure like a crisis of identity, that I was really starting to see real-time errors in the Christian doctrine and in the scriptures that was also saying, wait a minute, right? Because I always felt very connected to Hashem. Do with that with you will. And I just started to say that, so as a separate, I started to feel that the Christian path was not as accurate, right? And it's certainly, right? And to me, as an evangelical at the time, I felt like, why are we always trying to emulate the Jews? Why don't we just, like, we're always talking about being grafted in, yet at the same time, we're talking about replacement theology, right? So it's like these things were not reconciling for me either. And there were a lot of things along the way that just weren't making sense. So when I started to investigate Judaism and the writings, I felt an immediate connection. Now, whether that stemmed from having a connection that I did not know at the time, all I know is that I felt, and I think I put this in the last Anusa, that I felt like these Rabbanim were writing letters directly to me. That's how it felt to me. And I felt for the first time in my life that I was getting answers to things that could not be explained in the Christian faith, no matter how hard they tried. And so there was this separate pool that even if everything on my family side was just all that, just making more of it than what it was, I believe wholeheartedly that I was still on the path to a conversion in my future. Now, when the Rav, like every Rav that kept trying to, because when you go to these conversations and you start telling about your family, immediately, each and every one without exception kept honing in, like, I think you're Jewish and we can't convert a Jew. And so there was all this like question. So they kept rerouting me back to investigate because they kept feeling that the minhagim were so intact. They didn't know if this was a family that had survived the Holocaust and maybe didn't want to talk about it. So there was always this rerouting of going back to your family that to me, I felt like it was so, there was layers upon layers. It was like an onion trying to unpeel and who would talk and who wouldn't talk and the fights and the conversations and always feeling like the black sheep of the family, like, oh my gosh, she's talking, she's asking, she's this. And I didn't really understand then what I do now, which explains a lot of the silence. And I think in Puerto Rico, again, and I put this in the new book, Vomitus Meritus, that kind of explains, although it wasn't set out to explain it directly, but why Puerto Rico in itself is a little late to the game in coming forward. And that has to do with the American colonization that happened after 1898, which was like a double silencing. So the silence that the Sepharad had known from the Inquisition was now doubled down with the American colonization in Law 53. So it was like a long time. And I hadn't realized that I was stepping onto sacred ground and unearthing like sacred, ground that had been buried for centuries. And I just felt like, can I just convert? Like, it was just so messy. It was just so, and I felt like conversion had offered a clear path. There was rules, there was this, no matter what was unearthed, I was a Jew. And so I think, when they have this, if somebody contacts me and they say, I'm thinking of whatever, like Ronit said, I don't convert anyone. I don't, I listen. What are you hearing? What is your intention? And sometimes that intention changes. I've met people that they're just looking for information, and years later, not only have they returned, they live in the land of Israel. They've, had full. So it's. I feel like it's a journey, right? But I think that as the person going through it, you have to be realistic at all times with what your intention is, and because let's say you go through it, like digging into this is so messy. Do you want it for yourself? I always say that's the bottom line question, right? do you want it for yourself? If all of this
Well,
went
also,
away,
do you want it for those who come after you too? Do you want it for your
exactly.
children, your
Well,
future
that was the
children?
other thing too, and it was a real conversation with my husband that this decision is going to change our grandkids, our great grandkids, like, and we were all aboard. I said, listen, I don't know. Abraham and Sarah had the same question, right? What do we do here, right? And look how, and I said to my husband, look how well it turned out for them. So maybe it could turn out well for us. I had no idea that would have led to all of this. But I think that even the evolution of information that's coming forward as people get older, as they're reflecting back, as they're, um, even just what we're able to unearth and all the collective, efforts, there's a lot of information that's coming forward. I feel like, when it comes to someone who has this Anusim background, my heart in the inside, it bleeds for them because I knowing the history and knowing the struggle for survival, I understand where the call is coming from. Si alguien es judío, siempre va a ser judío, right? La sangre se llama. So I know where it's coming from, and so sometimes it becomes hard to temper that passion for it while letting the person come to their own conclusion, because ultimately they're the ones that have to walk this walk. And once they get out of the mikvah, that's a responsibility that starts right then and there. And I'm always honest with people that as romantic of a story, right, that the Anusim is, there is a real life that you have to live outside of the mikvah. And are you ready for that? So in good times and in bad times, when they're, telling us that we are colonizers and we're usurping the land, are you going to be down for that, right? Are you going to be with
Yeah.
us? And so there's like real,
Well, that's what every rabbi does, right? Somebody
right,
just wants to convert. They're supposed to dissuade them and tell them all the difficulties involved with being Jews. Tell you
Hmm.
really want this for yourself.
and I think that comes down to it, because this is what, if we're looking to rectify. So speaking as someone who comes from this background, if I'm looking to really make a full circle, what was taken from me, right? This is it. This is the life. This is the identity that was stolen from me, and I want it back, and I want it double, right? Like I want everything for it. And but I'm always like, I try to be so blunt and honest with people that I'm having the conversation with privately that are on this, because again, sometimes, and my mom says this, people only see the bright side of everything that you will have ever done. They will never see the struggle that you went through and all the fighting and all the years and this. And not only that, to be one of the first people from Puerto Rico to say it openly and publicly, and to claim some of the ancestors in the height of George Floyd, in the height of all these things. Those were real challenges. And so those are things that people will forget about or may not know, and they'll only see the upside of it, but they won't see the day-to-day of it. And so that's what people have to keep in mind, right? Like, this is a commitment for life. This is a lifestyle. It's not just, contrary to what a lot of people try to say about us, you don't get a BMW when you sign up, you're not automatically rich, and you don't control the media. And if we did, then we'd have a different narrative going out, about,
We're really bad at it if we
exactly.
did. Yeah.
We need to be, replaced
Well,
on
one
that.
thing,
So,
one thing I'm very mindful of, it's interesting because the internet is helping a lot. So I sometimes get, whether it's a personal conversation that happens by chance or via social media, young people who maybe were trying to find out about their family, and somebody old will say, "Oh, we came from Spain, we're from the Canary Islands," something like that, and then they said to me, "Oh, I'm exploring my family's history," and I just look at them and I look at what they look like, and I mean, it could be my son or something. I mean, they look like a Jew, and I just say, all I say is, why don't you explore your family's last names? Why don't you go and investigate, how they got those last names? And I'm very careful because we do not proselytize, and I don't want to be the one who's pushing anybody and saying, "Oh, it's because you're Jewish." I'm never going to do that. One interesting
And I want to.
tell,
Yeah, go ahead.
one
Yeah.
interesting tell, and I'm thinking about my childhood in Venezuela. I grew up in Venezuela, and like everyone else in Latin America, we watch novelas on TV, of course. Well, if you look at the things you see in a novela, right, you'll see some things that definitely come from us. Like they'll come into the house and say to the uncle, bendición. And then they
yes,
go down and the
yes,
uncle puts their
yes,
hand on the
yes,
forehead. And
yes.
the formula is the Kohanim blessing, right? Where do you
And
think
I'm
they
so
got that
shocked that
from?
you said that. My mom, back when I was going speaking with the Rav that actually brought me back, my mom wrote a letter. And in there, she references when her grandmother was dying, and it's this whole Kohanim blessing she gave to her. And she wrote it out for him. So I still have that letter. But you're right. Like you see it. And sometimes I think that they don't even know what they're doing. Like, it's
They
so.
don't, but it's a tell. That's why I'm saying it's a tell. Or you'll see the whole, they have a little altar in the house and the candle lighting. And then, I mean, in Venezuela, there was all kinds of syncretism, not just Jewish, by the way. You had, voodoo, all kinds of things.
Yes.
You had the Native American, I used to joke that there was this waterfall, if you live in Caracas, coming down from the Avila, and it was the cleanest water you ever saw. Nobody dared pollute it because they were afraid of the goddess of the water, and still are, by the way. And they thought, if you go, you get of it, maybe it will have healing power. So it was super carefully taken care of. So there was other kinds of syncretism, but I mean, I
So
only noticed a few customs watching that.
something else we haven't spoken about yet is this emergence of new communities that are kind of forming on their own with the support of internet and some rabbis or educators that are from abroad. And what I've been finding in places where I've gone now, I've gone to Mexico, Ecuador, Colombia, Brazil, New Mexico, Puerto Rico, and I still want to go to places like Peru, like to Guatemala, like El Salvador. That the people who, some may have Jewish roots, some may not, because it's so hard to know this because of what we spoke about at length now, that they tried to hide it for so long. And unless you're living in a mountain town in Portugal like Belmonte, where everyone knows, or you're Xuetas because your last names have been hanging on a convent for centuries, you don't, And so they're coming to the local Jewish communities and saying, hey, we for whatever reason, we want to learn, we want to come in, we want to get to know about the Jewish people. And they're getting flat out rejected for many reasons, for different skin color, for different socioeconomic reasons, or my favorite, because they know more about the mitzvot and Torah and the blessings in Hebrew because they've studied it versus the local communities, some members who were born into it, but who aren't practicing Jews, or aren't very studied or knowledgeable Jews. So they don't want to pray next to someone who isn't even Jewish, but knows more than they do, right? It's shining up a mirror against them. Oh, I'm such a bad Jew. I don't even know as much as this guy. So they're getting rejected. And what I find fascinating, absolutely fascinating, is that instead of saying, oh, forget this, these people don't even want us, well, we're going to, keep exploring or go somewhere else, they somehow are finding, they double down. They're forming their own communities. They're building their own synagogues. They're teaching themselves. It's inspiring for someone like me, who I'm not the most observant Jew. And I go and I meet these communities of people who have just learned about their Jewish roots, or they don't have Jewish roots and they just learned about Judaism as a whole in the last 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, what have you, and are practicing with such devotion and such passion. It inspires, it awakens something in me. And so I find this fascinating because no one's really talking about this that's happening in Latin America. No one's really mentioning this. And I think that this is something that we need to shine a light on, and we need to be aware that this is happening. I was just in Puebla, Mexico, where you have, for all intents and purposes, black hatters. You could have taken them out of Williamsburg. They just look Mexican, and they're walking around downtown Puebla, and there's no official Jewish community in Puebla. This is a community of conversos that have started a yeshiva. They started a school by conversos, teaching other conversos, and anyone, by the way, they don't discriminate. If you're Jewish from Mexico City and you want to learn, you can come and learn with them. And they have 40 students in person from all over Latin America that have come to Puebla now, and they have online 40 students from all over Latin America. And I think this is a fascinating phenomenon that we need to be paying attention to.
There's a very prominent rabbi. His name is Rabbi Ventura. Maybe you've heard about him. He actually went to the Hebrew University. He went to yeshiva in Israel. And I mean, he's
very controversial in Brazil.
Is he? Okay. Well, but he knows a lot, and he does a lot of work.
There's many rabbis who are working in this.
And there's Rabbi Birnbaum, who does a lot.
Eliyahu Birnbaum is amazing, and yes, there's and a lot of them are getting very, very much attacked for not proselytizing, but for helping people access and learn about Judaism.
I
And
think they're more
I am
effective coming from a similar kind of background. I think they have a sensitivity that other
sure.
people will lack because they haven't walked in those shoes and they don't, it takes many years of working with this community to sort of understand, how they feel and think about it. And, what I started to say earlier is one of the things that I'm doing is breaking the taboo of talking about it. So I
Right.
opened it up to the community. I said, ask me things, let's talk about it. And we have discussed some things that people wanted to know about. And every conversation leads to a new subject. And sometimes I do attract anti-Semites who come to attack us. We're actually talking about not the word marrano, but why pigs are not kosher. And that was huge. It went everywhere and all kinds of responses. And we do eat it, we don't eat it. It saved our lives. We're grateful for it. There were all sorts of reactions. So, I mean,
I
it's
think you're right. I think there's so much access with the internet. There's people have access to everything now, and there's documentaries, and there's books, and there's virtual lectures. Like people can learn about this if they want to. Something I'm very interested in. Both of you know this is actually forming trips and groups and
Yes.
going to visit the communities. And I'm so excited that we're doing something this
if they'll
October.
welcome you and they don't always want you to come in and
No, for sure not. But to go to the places where this is happening and to meet the local Jewish community, but also the communities, the emerging
That are
communities,
quiet.
as what been termed. We have one in October in New Mexico that you both know about, and now we just released Purim. We're going to do Purim in Puerto Rico
oh
next
wow,
year. So
wow.
we're really excited
Yeah.
to bring people who want to learn about this and actually be in the place, be visiting the local communities, because there's something different about watching something online or reading a book and then actually going to the place and hearing from people that live there, that have lived it, that are academics, that are lecturers, etc. And that to me has been pretty
See,
inspiring, and
here's an
I'm excited
example. So
to.
I was doing a talk about Saint Esther in El Paso, okay, for the Society of Crypto Judaic Studies, and I connected with this man from El Paso who descends from forced converts, and they still celebrate the festival of Saint Esther, and they have like a Purim party. And he agreed to send me, he
Wow.
wouldn't let me share it. He agreed to send me a video of they didn't want their faces to be seen. Anyway, they were celebration. And boy, was that fun. They have a Haman piñata, a lot of booze, really good food. They have a Queen Esther crown. Somebody gets crowned the Queen of
Oh,
Purim. She gets to be Queen Esther.
So is this something that was explained to you as having been passed down from generations, or
Yeah,
with
he
the
has his
internet they?
mother's. No, no, he has like a beautiful crown that's like a vintage crown they've been passing down. The festival queen gets to
we
wear
got
it.
to get in on that.
I'm looking at this party. I'm like, when am I getting invited? Right? I
I know.
want to come. I
Right,
said I'll
right,
travel to
right.
El Paso, and I have not been invited. That one person allowed me to share for my talk a photo of her from the masquerade with the mask, not without, and no one else would allow it. I mean, and there's still this inherited fear and desire for
Year.
privacy. And
This is what I was just going to say, that this is, I feel like this was like my angst in the beginning, even coming out with the last Anusa. But what I will say that I never could have expected, especially with this last book, Vomitus Meritus, I work with the greater family, right? But there's always this hope that my family, which was what my Rav wanted, we were really targeting my family because of what they were seeing. And what I have to say is that the books have led to more people breaking out of that fear and saying more and encouraging more and sending photos and sending stories or whatever. And I feel like I'm so much more hopeful today, 2026, than even in 2019 when the book came out. um, it really, I think for some of these families, if you're watching, I get it with these, the culture of silence. Paso a pasito, that's the only thing I could say. Don't force, right? Like we can't force.
no,
Just keep living. I can't even tell you at this last year, since January, the leaps and bounds that my own family has made, and the support that they've come forward. It's just like it's really moving to see the change that's happening. What that will equate to, I don't know. I just know that, you know, everyone has to do their part, right? And take that brave step like Esther Amalcas. And maybe that's the reason why we, you know, have her. So she's the first Anusa, you know, but there was this time where she had to make a decision. I'm going to put everything on the line. And I think there is a moment for every converso, whether when you just finding out, to that crossover, that you're crossing the Rubicon and saying that this is where I want my life to go. And it does feel like you're out there and you're out by yourself. And I'm so glad that groups like Ronit and your, you know, documentaries, that they're showing you're not alone, and it is connecting. And I have a saying, like, if they don't give you a seat at the table, build it yourself. And maybe that's what we're seeing with
or build another table.
Exactly.
Right.
You know, but do it with everything. Dale, give it everything you've got, learn it, do it, make it part of you. This is what was stolen for us. Take it back, right? Take it back and make it yours. And, you know, we're going to be closing out, but, you know, we started saying that the connection between us was Besheret. And
Right.
I tend to think that the beauty of those who have this Anusim background and those who were from birth, it is Besheret, in a way that probably they don't know, that when they get together, it's a real shidduch, a fire, right? Because they come with this passion, right? And sometimes the from birth have lost that passion, but they have all the rote knowledge, right? And how great would it be to get these two people together, right? Like achavruta, like we're always talking about, that fights it out, that dukes it, that this. Like you said, I'm getting revived by watching these people who have this fire.
100%.
There's something that they bring to the table. And Amir Sarau, who's been from birth, also brings something to the table. And I really feel like we need each other, and we will be a better community overall. And I want to close out with each of you just kind of saying what your hope is for the future, and what you hope your work will lead to. Of course, we could never know where it's all going, but both of you, like all of us have been in this space for a while, and we've seen a lot of great changes, and we also know there's a lot of work left to be done. So I want to open up to both of you. What do you hope for the future?
Well, it's funny. I didn't get to respond that, you know, Ronit had said, you know, we don't proselytize, and we're very clear about that. And I want to kind of challenge that and say, look, every Jewish community generation, let's say, that has come before has had other sets of challenges to develop. And I think today, with AI, with social media, with this attention economy that we're on, you know, we can't focus at all. It's a numbers game, and I am I guess, one of the few that I don't think we should be proselytizing, but I do believe that we should be making this easier for people to access Jewish customs, Jewish traditions, Jewish philosophy, Jewish wisdom. Like, I'm very proud of being Jewish. There's certain things I like about it, certain things that I don't like about it. But the more that I can share what I love about it, I don't see anything wrong in that. And if people want to learn, if they want to understand, if they want to study, I personally believe we should be making the door a little bit more open. And I don't think we should be making it so hard and rejecting. And so I hope that through the work that we do, like with the Xueta Island, the documentary that I would love to make available for your viewers, Reemerge Project, reemergeproject.com is this new project we're working on with getting more of these stories out all over Latin America. I think the more that we can speak about it, basically what you and Devorah was saying, Ronit, that you want to share this information so people can learn and engage and study for themselves, you know. And I love that mission, and I'm 100% for that. And I think the more that we can teach ourselves, the better that we can lay the framework, the path for the future for ourselves. And that's my hope is, and that's what I am working on a daily basis.
Right. What I tell my community is that, you know, I'm the other side of the mirror. I always tell them, you could have been me, I could have been you, right? We all started out together in the same place, and in my family, for whatever reason, that's the way it worked out. And so the way I see it is almost, let's step out from the two sides of the mirror, let's meet. And I try, and you know, I try to say whatever I can do to help you. And I do want it to be easier. I mean, I have a whole community who read the prophecy, you know, in the Torah that says that Sfarad will get the exiles of Sfarad, they'll get the Negev. And they haven't made a plan for a city. They have a name for it. They call it a chazon ayin, like the vision, the prophecy is to become true. And then they have a whole idea for it. And I'm like, well, why not? Those of them who want to, why shouldn't they? Not everybody chooses this difficult mission to do. Why shouldn't they get to do it? I actually think there should be a museum in their city about the Anusim experience, Sephardic/Anusim museum. I think there should be one. I actually have two St. Esther's to donate to it if anybody wants to build it. So,
well, who knows? I may have some things, we'll see. But guys, it's been just an amazing privilege and such an honor. I always have a great time. Speaking privately with you, you've been on for a while, and I'm just so honored to be in this movement with you guys together. And I hope that we do this more. And we have a look back 10 years. Ronit, you and I kind of did that with the Arroz con Devorah season 4 reboot, where we got to kind of look back. And it is like shocking, all the great changes and everything. But I hope that we are of old age looking back, hopefully still, in the thick of it with everyone, and just saying, remember when, and that is, what we can all hope for. But guys, that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed your time with us for this special edition of Arroz con Devorah. Stay tuned. And again, check out all the links in the description box, not only for Xueta Island, but for hands-on holidays with Ronit. You can get links to my books as well. Share this episode. I really think that it really helps everyone. We're all in this together. You can do your part, share in the mitzvah, and send it to someone you think may enjoy it. But that's it, and I hope we'll all be together again soon. Bezrat Hashem.
Thank you for all the great work, Devorah. Amazing. So happy. Toda.